Hello and welcome back to the Countering Climate Skepticism podcast. This is the podcast where we inconsistently release episodes weeks and months apart. Thanks for bearing with us on that. It's been quite a hectic few weeks for us, what with the end of PhDs, the end of term, lots of technical issues on both of our sides, trying to sort out things. On this podcast, we discuss and counter the arguments given by climate change skeptics and deniers. We explain the truth behind climate change and unpick the factual reality from the sensationalist climate skeptic arguments you might see on social media or in the news or in the Tory party manifesto, possibly. We aim to help you challenge any climate denial arguments you might come across. My name is John Rainier, a history teacher, and I'm joined by my co-host Mark Prosser, a climate scientist who has recently finished his PhD. Apologies for the delay releasing this episode. I think it's been way over 5 weeks, to be honest, and we'll try and release a few in quick succession to make up from it over the next month. We're recording right in the middle, or right after the GCSE Year 11 exams. God, what a hectic few weeks it's been. And it's been really busy for both of us. Mark, I believe you've had your final Viva oral exam and have finished your PhD now?
Yeah, I had my Viva, which was, I was sitting in a room for 2.25 hours with two professors that I'd never met, and they sort of grilled me on the 150, 200-page thesis that I'd sent to them, and it was actually quite fun. Surprisingly fun. I mean, in the preparation for it was a lot of work, obviously, but once you were there, it was kind of okay. And I haven't quite got my PhD yet. I've got to basically implement a load of corrections that they pointed out in the thesis itself. So that's what I've been doing today, actually.
Ah, cool. And it's my understanding then that doing corrections is just a standard part of the PhD procedure.
You can get major corrections, but I've only got minor, so it's just trivial things, basically.
Ah, awesome. That's cool. You may have also noticed on the podcast that Mark sounds mildly less shit this week. I've convinced him to upgrade his microphone to one that didn't cost £7.50 on eBay.
£7.50? I found one on eBay for £4, John, and you had me crank out 20 big ones from my wallet. Anyway, how the hell are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Dead tired. We're recording in the middle of the week this week. Normally we record on a Saturday morning, so I'm normally at least vaguely awake. After school on a Tuesday, I am falling asleep. So have you come across any climate denial recently then, Mark?
As it happens, yes, I have. And from none other than presidential hopeful Donald J. Trump. He appeared on Fox and Friends, and we'll put the link in the show notes. This actually seriously made me laugh. It goes something like this. When they say that the seas will rise over the next 400 years, 1/8 of an inch, which basically means have a little more beachfront property, okay? Now, John, can you spot anything at all wrong with this? Anything at all?
Well, if the seas rise, you're going to have less property, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's so obvious. So setting aside the 1/8 of an inch in 400 years claim, which, if you do the maths, is something like 1,000 times smaller than the rate we predict, leaving aside that very small issue, a little experiment you could do at home, listeners. Take a container, stick a rock in it, then pour some water in that container, then pour a little more water on it. As the water goes up, the surface area of the rock declines. So, like you say, John, you don't actually get more beachfront property, you get less, just to be super clear on that. You get complex high-level climate denial, John, and then you get stuff like this. Dear Lord. I would also point out that Trump, with his 1/8 of an inch in 400 years, has tried to slip past us our old friend, Ziggurat level 3, which is...
even if we are the cause, the amount of climate change will be insignificant.
Exactly. So, yeah, we're not going to get 1/8 of an inch over 400 years. It's going to be a lot faster than that.
What a div. Yeah, you vote Trump. Okay, so we've got one more major category of climate denial to cover. The top level of our climate denial ziggurat, level 6b, the denial argument. If tech doesn't solve the problem, well, then we're doomed. This is the alternate version of level 6 that we covered in our last episode. If tech doesn't solve the problem, then we shouldn't wreck the economy to save the planet. We aim to cover this in our next episode. But today we thought we'd deal with 3 questions that have come our way during the past 10 episodes or so. So this is going to be a Q&A session. The 3 questions, and we'll put timestamps in the show notes if you want to jump to a particular one. But these are our 3 questions. So our first question is from Millie. She asks, how do we know what the climate was like tens of millions of years ago? And then question 2 is from Lisa, who asks, what should governments be doing to tackle climate change? And then question 3 is from Laura and Dan, who ask, what's more important in the fight against climate change, knowledge change or behavioural change? So we've also had a couple of other questions, one from Rob and one from Aaron, that we're going to put in another episode because they're ones that we could push forward into the next one or that also could dedicate a whole episode to. So Rob's question was about the role of a carbon tax in dealing with climate change. That's a big enough question to warrant its own episode. And then Aaron's question, which we'll do in our next episode, how do you respond to folks who say, but our country only emits a piddly 2% of annual CO2 emissions. Why should we have to bust our asses when China emits far, far more? Okay, so let's start with question 1 then. So the question in full, Millie would like to know how we know what the climate was like not thousands of years ago, but in the distant past, e.g. tens of millions of years ago, for example, going back to when the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yeah, it's a good question. So John, do you know anything yourself about how we know what temperature, precipitation were doing in past climates?
Well, as you know, Mark, before this podcast, my knowledge of climate science extended as far as what I teach to 11-year-olds in Year 7 geography lessons, and I'm not even a specialist in that subject at all. So, based on that knowledge, does it come from taking ice core samples in the Antarctic?
Yes, it does. You're right. But I thought
nice.
you were a history teacher, not a geography teacher. What's that about?
Oh, yeah. That's not how it works these days. Everyone teaches
Really?
a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Have you any ideas how ice cores teach us about certain aspects of climate, or?
I guess, is it because it's preserved in the ice, so you can detect CO2 levels from the atmosphere that would have existed when that ice was on the surface, maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So ice cores are one key bit of evidence, but let me go through some of the other sources a bit more systematically first. Some common sources of past climate data are tree rings. When you cut a cross-section of a tree, you'll see a bunch of rings extending outwards. Rings that are kind of wider indicate warmer and wetter climates. Narrower rings, the opposite, so colder and drier years, basically. And each ring is a year. Then, as you mentioned, we have ice cores. Basically, you drill a long, deep core, maybe even kilometers in length, of ice from either Greenland or Antarctica. And from these, you can get information about temperature through ratios of different oxygen isotopes. But also, like you say, you can directly get the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, since the atmosphere of the past is literally preserved, trapped inside tiny bubbles contained within the ice. Pretty cool, huh?
It is pretty crazy what you can do with science these days.
Yeah, definitely. However, Millie is right that you might struggle to learn about the climate at the time of the dinosaurs, because although trees can be really old, unfortunately, there ain't no 100,000-year-old trees out there.
Well, it's funny you should say that, though, Mark, because when we were in Arizona, we visited one of the national parks there called the Petrified Forest, which contains prehistoric trees that are millions of years old that were buried in sediment, and over time the wood has crystallised. So is there no way that can be used to test for signs of climate change?
Yeah, so that's a good point, John. I had to look up the petrified forest when you mentioned in the messages. The petrified trees of which you speak can tell us a lot about the climate. Some 225 million years ago through their fossilized plants, animals, and soils that are contained within them. However, this would be like a snapshot of 225 million years ago rather than a record over time that something like a tree ring or an ice core would give you, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the oldest ice cores come pretty close to telling us about the climate of the last 1 million years. So with tree rings and ice cores, that's the near and the middle climate past covered. But for the deep past, we tend to rely on, among other sources of data, what's known as sediment cores. And one of the oldest continuous sediment cores drilled comes from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and it's called PEAT, the Pacific Equatorial Age Transect. And this tells us about the climate of the last 50 million years. So that's pretty epic. If you go back further than 50 million years ago, then obviously it's harder, and climate information is inferred from a number of sources, including various fossilized remains, such as the one you mentioned, the petrified forest in Arizona. Yeah. But the further you go back, the more there are uncertainties about what the past climate was like at that time. So we're more sure, basically, about the more recent past, and we're less sure the further you go back. But then there's a class of very ancient minerals called zircons, which, because they contain radioactive uranium and thorium, they can be dated. And the oldest zircons that we found almost go back to Earth's very beginning and tell us that there was liquid water already on Earth's surface as far back as 4.3 billion years ago.
Wow.
Just to put that into context, the Earth is 4.6 billion years ago, so that's like 93% of the way back in Earth's history, which tells us something about the climate back then, because, not all situations and climate situations would permit there to be water on the surface. So the fact that there was water on the surface tells us that the climate can only have been within a certain range. Yeah. And it also tells us, weirdly, about the prospects for alien life elsewhere in the universe, which I think is pretty bloody amazing.
So is that going to be our next episode, like alien denial?
It could be. Depends on what the listeners want, John. Depends on what the listeners want. But
send us your questions if you want us to introduce any alien-related climate denial questions in. I don't know what I'm on about. I haven't slept.
It's all right. Yeah, I guess we can be anti-climate change denial, but then introduce our own subtle form of anti-science. Like aliens are amongst us or something like that. But yeah, anyway. So I put a
next week on ancient aliens. Yeah.
Yes. We might attract a different. Ancient Aliens is it on Netflix?
Yeah, I think so. It's fucking ridiculous. Oh my god.
Is it?
Complete tangent here, but my god, I just chuckle myself through every episode. Here is a rock that we found from deep underneath the earth, and it may actually have been built by aliens. We even, when we were in Bosnia, we went up to visit the world's largest pyramid, which is actually just a slightly square hill, and it was really awkward because there was a whole thing there about this guy giving us a guided tour of a hill where they've excavated some rock that's completely naturally formed, and he was saying how it's been scientifically proven that it's actually been built by humans hundreds of thousands of years ago, and it's all just utter bollocks. And we nodded and smiled through the whole lot, and then went off going, well, that was a load of bollocks. I mean, I suppose at least it keeps people in a job, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah. People like they're aliens, or not. It's not even aliens, is it? It's just like, humans being... Yeah, that's like historical rubbish, but I guess people are up for that sort of thing. They like that sort of conspiracy theory or something like that. A nice story, even if it's inaccurate.
I would love to see what the correlation is between belief in aliens and climate denial. I'm sure there would be some overlap there.
It could be, yeah. Anyway, so coming back from that tangent. Moving on. Yeah, so anyway, so there's a link that I've put in there. Can't for the life of me remember what it is. Maybe it was about, yes, I do remember now. So it's about zircons. So if you want to learn more about zircons, you can have a look at this link. But basically, there are all sorts of data over different time spans with different accuracies and limitations. And if we piece them together in a clever fashion, allows us to Sherlock Holmes style infer something about the Earth's climate conditions at various points in the past, including when the dinosaurs roamed. For those interested in the climate of the deep, deep past, and by deep, deep past, I mean between the time of what's known as the Cambrian explosion, when life exploded on planet Earth, and that was 540 million years ago, so we're now talking like hundreds of millions of years ago, all the way to the extinction of the dinosaurs, which was 65 million years ago. So that's the deep, deep climate past. And then there's this figure that I found on Wikipedia, and there's a link in the show notes if you want to have a look at this figure. So if you scroll down from it, there's some information on where the data came from. So it shows you the climate during that period. And for the period hundreds of millions of years ago, when the dinosaurs did roam, the data source is apparently from the shells of macroscopic marine organisms. All very clever, wouldn't you say, John?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I think it really shows how interconnected the scientific community is in the 21st century, because the amount of data required to make these judgments must rely on thousands of scientists across the globe working on very specific areas that need to be then constructed into these global patterns. So it just wouldn't have been possible to gain this level of understanding about the world 100 years ago.
Yep. We've definitely come a long way.
Okay, well, I hope that answers Millie's question there. Moving on to question 2 then. So Lisa asks, what are the main things that governments need to be doing to prevent climate change?
Well, I think it varies a lot depending on the country we're talking about. So maybe I'll just focus on the UK in my answer here, since it is perhaps the country whose climate policy I know most about, although I don't know a great deal. And this is, after all, a UK-based podcast. So yeah, we'll stick with the UK, I guess. In any case, a lot of what I'm about to say probably applies to other developed countries, give or take. So it should be relevant. Any thoughts yourself, John, on what the UK government could be doing that it isn't currently doing vis-a-vis the climate?
Well, stopping introducing new fossil fuel energy sources might be a good start. Getting more innovative with climate change prevention methods, so investing in new technologies, because it just feels like we're being left in the dust by other nations in the world. What do you think, Mark?
So first, let's have a look at another website. The link for this website will be in the show notes. It's climateactiontracker.org. So have you got that open, John? Or?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So what's going on? Can you describe for the listeners who can't see this at the time of recording, what's going on with this global map, John, and how would you say the UK is doing?
Well, this is a really interesting website, this, because it is an independent source, would I be correct, Mark? So it's not sponsored by any government organisation. And it basically rates every country on its climate action in several different categories. For the UK, it appears that we're categorised as insufficient in our climate action. But contrary to what we've anecdotally discussed on this podcast, the EU also appears to be in this category. We've often talked about the fact that we're falling behind other countries in Europe, and it seems like in this way of categorising, that's not necessarily the case. I was talking to a family member the other week, and they were arguing that, we're not even in the top 10 countries for global emissions, so why should we do more when other countries are causing bigger problems? Kind of like what you mentioned has been one of the other questions that we've been asked to answer. And I did point out to them that we are the 17th worst country out of 195. So just because we're not in the top 10, that doesn't mean we aren't awful. And then when you factor in by population in Europe, the only countries with a higher population, with a higher population were ranked worse than us. And also the map shows that China and Russia, so the map on this website shows China and Russia are significantly worse, despite all the investment China has been putting into renewable energy sources. So actually, depressingly, even though we are doing awfully, we're doing okay compared to other countries, even though we are insufficient.
Yeah, it is somewhat of a depressing graph, and we will specifically come back and address the argument that you mentioned there from your family member that the UK is only emitting a fraction of total greenhouse gases, so therefore why should we care? So we'll come back to that. But for now, returning to the graph, it's sort of like a sort of scorecard, and there are 5 ratings given to countries, going from the best to the worst. The best possible score is that the country is 1.5 degree compatible. And if they are, then they're in green. And I don't have it open in front of me actually at the moment, but I don't think there's any countries that are green at the moment. And then the second one is yellow, which means that the country's actions are almost sufficient. And then you get insufficient action in orange, and that's where the UK and the EU is. And then in red, you've got highly insufficient. And so China, Canada, India are currently red. And then you've got the worst score, which is critically insufficient. And this is in black, and Russia and Saudi Arabia are 2 such countries. So while the UK's progress is rated as insufficient, this insufficient progress rating depressingly probably does put us in the top 50% of climate action worldwide. And indeed, the UK had a pretty ambitious plan to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. However, more recently, Rishi Sunak, the current UK Prime Minister, although probably not for long, has been busy delaying the date at which new petrol and diesel cars can no longer be sold in the UK, and granting more and more permits to dig up more oil and gas from the North Sea. So, I don't know, perhaps the UK could not do these things, perhaps, and try to stick to its long-term plan that it has set out for itself? Just a thought.
Well, no, you've got it all wrong, Mark.
Have I?
Yeah, the Conservative manifesto is very clear that they are doing what is considered to be a reasonable focus on net zero. Reasonably taking steps towards reducing it. I wonder if in 20 years' time we'll be looking back on those steps as being reasonable.
Don't get me started, John. Don't get me started. I am not a fan of Rishi Sunak's climate policy, to put it mildly.
Yeah, so this is interesting because there's also another system that ranks the countries. It's called the Climate Change Performance Index, and that basically rank orders all countries in the world. It's where England is currently, or the UK is currently, the 17th country in the world for its climate change action. And they actually don't put any countries in the top 3 spots because according to their criteria, no country in the world right now is doing enough to significantly address climate change action until a country is. They've decided that no country should be ranked as being in a pole position for that.
Yeah. I've got the website open in front of me, and we'll put a link in the show notes as well for this one. So it's really interesting to look at because it's sort of the same, but it's also a bit different as well. So they have the United States doing like worse than the website Climate Action Tracker. So there's a little bit of a difference of opinion, but it's kind of broadly similar. And I guess it actually breaks down Europe a little bit into the different countries, whereas the Climate Action Tracker has Europe as a block. So yeah, but there's obviously like different countries within Europe are doing different things. So so have a look at both of them, see what you think. So there's also, did you get a chance to have a look at this particular link, John? And we'll put a link in the show notes for this.
So is this
what did you make of this?
Is this the graph that is showing heat pumps per 100,000 people?
Exactly.
So for our listeners, this is a graph that basically works out or plots out the number of heat pumps per 100,000 people by country, and it includes most countries in Europe. So there's about 20 different countries here. Norway, Finland, Sweden at top of the list here, with all above 22,000 heat pumps per 100,000, all the way up to 30,000. Then we have Estonia and Denmark, who are still ranked very highly. And then we have France, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Lithuania, Spain, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Portugal, Germany, Belgium, Poland, Ireland and Slovakia, who are all better than the UK. The only country with fewer heat pumps per 100,000 people is Hungary. So it looks like the UK is absolutely miles behind other countries when it comes to rolling out heat pumps.
Yes, definitely. And it's really important as well because, heating our homes is a big contributor to climate change. So we need, heat pumps are going to be, a way to deal with this. So we kind of need to get going. But yeah, my feeling is that there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit for the UK, since a good chunk of the UK emissions, like I said, are from heating our homes. And UK homes are notoriously leaky, as anyone who's ever rented one will be acutely aware of. The government could provide more grants, loans to incentivise the more proactive members of the public to make such changes. Anyone with a south or indeed a west or east facing roof should be encouraged to get solar panels, perhaps.
Yeah, it's encouraging that at least it appears that a lot of new builds are being built with solar panels as standard and electric car chargers outside. That's
heartening to hear, John. But I also hear, maybe because I was over in Northern Ireland, but you hear about a lot of homes that are still being built with the bare minimum of energy efficiency regulation. To be honest, I'm not an expert here or in what the UK could be doing if it was to take a more ambitious approach to lowering carbon emissions, but it would probably involve improving public transport. Just on a personal level, I am now a fossil fuel motorcyclist, partly because train travel has just become so expensive.
Yeah. And you came up to see us on your motorbike a few weeks back, didn't you?
I did.
And
sorry. Go
on. Is it as comfortable motorcycling across the country as opposed to getting the train?
Depends what the weather's doing, to be honest. It's if the wind is blowing like crazy, you fear for your life, and if it's at all cold, you freeze to death. So maybe it's not as comfortable, but I don't know. There's something extra that it gives you, that you can't quantify, John. A sense of being alive, on the vicious road, So I don't know. Maybe it's just the adrenaline junkie within me needs that. But not one for comfort, maybe. Yeah. So it cost me. What did it cost me to come see you? It cost me, I think it was like £7 to get the way from Aylesbury to Liverpool. So it cost me like £3 to get from Aylesbury to you. So some fossil fuel got burnt and stuck up in the atmosphere, but maybe not that much overall. It is a pretty efficient motorbike. But yeah. And a final, perhaps unpopular opinion of mine is that maybe something needs to be done about aviation, given aviation's atrocious climate footprint. Some statistics here. Apparently 50% of UK flights are taken by just 10% of the UK population. And globally, just 1% of people take 50% of all flights each year.
Wow.
Some links in the show notes if you want to check out the statistics. So one thing that's been suggested is perhaps a frequent flyer levy or something like that. So that, people who want to just take one holiday a year or something like that, infrequent flyers aren't hit first. So anyway, that's just a suggestion.
I don't see why it's so difficult for people to get behind the idea that those that are causing the biggest amount of damage should foot the biggest bills.
Yes, well, there you go, John. There you go. It is what it is.
Okay, so moving on to question 3 now. So this is from Laura and Dan. Which do you think is more important, achieving knowledge change, i.e. people being convinced of the facts of climate change, or achieving behavioural change, people doing stuff that's good for the climate without necessarily knowing it's good for the climate? So Laura and Dan gave some examples of what they were thinking of. We were thinking about reducing car use, for example. You could theoretically get people to reduce their car use if alternatives are better. For example, public transport feels better, or you can get people to be vegetarian if you say it improves their health and if they encounter vegetarian food, etc., etc.
Yeah, so do you have an opinion on this question, John?
I think behavioural change is the most important for most people, but I think knowledge change is essential for anyone who has a big impact, like we were literally just talking about. You have a responsibility to be aware of the impact of your actions. So if we're having a significant impact, people must not remain ignorant. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think, like you, John, I'm tempted to query whether it's why can't we have both at the same time? Promote understanding about the climate problem while also emphasising that there are what are known as co-benefits of living a low-carbon lifestyle. For example, the health benefits from a vegetarian diet. Now, I've heard some people argue that everyone already knows about climate change by now. There's no point, trying to teach people further. They already know about it and they know the science. Now, if this were true, then the answer to Laura and Dan's question would be to just focus on behavioural change. However, I'm not entirely sure I agree with this and wonder whether it is just everyone who lives in our bubble thinks so. Just from random conversations I've had with people around the UK, you get the impression that some people are barely aware of the issue at all and lack even basic knowledge. 6 months ago, I was being interviewed for Chinese TV, and one of the questions I was asked, which almost made me drop my mic, was along the lines of, "This climate change thing, is it bad?" Mind totally blown.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And discussions I've had with people outside of my immediate friends and colleagues have just highlighted the amount of anti-climate change information that is being subconsciously absorbed by people through social media, news sources, and also the classic uninformed people loudly voicing their incorrect opinions, largely on the internet. So the family member I was talking to the other week, they're a very intelligent person, they're well educated, they try to keep themselves informed, but it just blew my mind when I was talking to them and they were completely unaware of the impact of key industries in the fossil fuel industry. They said that the transport sector wasn't that big a problem for climate change when they work in the food delivery sector and yet didn't know it was the second largest cause of global emissions behind only electricity and heating. So I think the scale of the problem is so massive, and yet still some people are still utterly unaware of just how big a problem it is.
Yeah, I'd say I'd have to agree. And your family member's probably not alone here. However, some people are well aware of the problem, and they might even worry about it, but still can't bring themselves to change their habits on a morality basis alone. Here, emphasising the co-benefits of making a change might be helpful. For example, living a low-carbon lifestyle can help with eco-anxiety, if that's an issue for you. And there are many other co-benefits that you can talk about, depending on who it is you're trying to talk to and their individual concerns. But yeah, trying to encourage behavioural change is a bit of a tricky one, because if you go too far with it, you might be perceived as pushy or maybe a bit nanny state, and that can backfire. So governments have resorted to nudging people, and the most famous example of nudging policy is painting a little fly on urinals across the country, so that us UK guys, piss at the little fly rather than on the walls or on the floor. But funnily enough, in recent years, I haven't seen that many flies on urinals, so I wonder what became of that particular nudge policy.
So what we need to do then is we need to paint little flies on all of the frequent flyers, so that people piss on them, and that might encourage some behavioural change.
Exactly, John. Exactly. You've got my point in one there.
Piss on the wealthy. That's the platform I'll stand on if I'm running for election.
Yes, I'm sure you'll be very popular, John, and you'll get all the votes. So anyway, but yes, if the government improves public transport, then behavioural change should naturally follow. I don't know whether Laura and Dan, what they think of my response of it's a case of both rather than either or. Maybe they think there's a bit of a cop-out. If so, my apologies there, guys.
Okay, so do keep the questions coming, and like we said earlier, we'll have an episode on the role of a carbon tax in tackling climate change in the near future, and we will tackle Aaron's question in the next episode.
Any climate good news stories this week, John?
Well, this week's story comes straight to you from the exciting world of cement. Scientists have found a way to recycle it from demolished buildings. So cement is one of the most common construction materials in the world, but also one of the biggest sources of gas emissions due to the chemical reactions when you heat limestone. So concrete is the most widely used material after water, apparently. If cement was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of carbon after China and the US, 7.5% of CO2. A tonne of CO2 is produced for every tonne of concrete. So the way of addressing it, if electric-powered furnaces using wind and solar were used to recycle concrete, then it would have zero emissions. So scientists at Cambridge University have discovered that concrete can be reactivated by reheating it. And they've also come up with this idea of piggybacking onto the steel recycling industry. So steel recycling involves floating chemicals known as slag on top of the steel to prevent it reacting with air. Concrete has almost the same chemical composition as slag, so the concrete can be reheated and reused in this process, removing the emissions from creating concrete. It will also reduce the carbon footprint of the steel industry because it removes the need to create slag, which has a carbon footprint. So as such, it will make both industries cheaper and cleaner, which is a double win. So isn't it great when recycling also works out as being cheaper and cleaner? It's like win, win, win. In the UK, based on current steel demand, it could produce up to a quarter of the UK's cement.
That's great. Yeah. Two birds with one stone. I really like those sorts of solutions. And like you say, like concrete is just it's a biggie, and we struggled for a long time to sort of come up with some solution that will deal with that aspect of the climate problem, because we just we're building so many new buildings globally each year. So I don't know if this solution can scale to the whole thing, but every little helps. Yeah, and it's all these industries, because everyone's aware of like transport being a major, well, I say everyone, most people, as we've discussed earlier, are aware of transport being a major emitter of CO2, and heating as well. But things like the construction of houses and that industry, I think a lot of us maybe weren't aware of just how big of a problem that is, myself included. Yeah. There's a whole society is based on like fossil fuels in one way or another. So it's just they're just intimately tied with everything. The plastic, that you drink water out of, that's made from fossil fuels. It's like we are a fossil fuel nation, So we're trying to get away from that, but everything we do gives out CO2. Okay, so that's it for this episode. So thank you for listening. You can find a link to all of the materials we've referenced in this episode in our show notes. We hope you'll join us next time when we will be tackling the final level of the climate denial ziggurat. If you want to know more about the Countering Climate Skepticism podcast, check out our website at ccspod.podbean.com. If you've enjoyed the episode and would like to support the show further, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to send us feedback and any more questions for us to answer, suggestions for denial, skepticism, contrarian arguments, or ideas for guests, or want to connect with us on social media, then feel free to do that through our email address. So goodbye from me, John Rainier. And goodbye from me, Mark Prosser.
And we leave you with this quote: "What we are doing to the forests of the world is but a mirror reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to one another." That's from Gandhi. So, see you next time.